Hi everyone. So you clicked on this link because you wanted to hear how I actually walked through that given initial problem. So if we take a look at what we have here, you're given two known equations, which is very common in the problems that we're going to do. It's very, very rare that we ever deal with just one single equation. It's also pretty rare that we only have one or two steps to a problem. So we can kind of clearly see here that we have two known equations and a given problem, so there's probably going to be a couple steps involved. So the goal of this problem is to solve for x, which is pretty common in your math classes. And we're going to be doing the same thing in physics, except it's not just going to be x, some random variable. It is going to have a purpose. So you may be solving for acceleration, displacement, force. It's going to have an actual meaning. But the only way for us to get to the point where we see that actual meaning is to have the algebra skills to get us there. So taking a look at this problem, we have z squared is equal to 3x plus 4y. Well, right off the bat, we know that x is not by itself and we want to get it by itself. So it's currently being added to 4y. So in order to undo the addition, we're going to subtract it over to the other side, giving us our x squared minus 4y is equal to 3x. Now, what I typically have people do at this point, if they're going to make an error, or I shouldn't say I don't have them do it, they do it in error, is that they see, okay, well, 3 is currently being multiplied, or I'm sorry, x is being multiplied by 3, so I'm going to have to divide the 3 over. You don't want to do that yet. You still have y and z in the equation. Both we know have equations associated with them. So we would want to substitute in those equations, or in this case, y is equal to 3, before we do anything with that 3x, because all you're going to do is potentially make an algebraic mistake by dividing the 3 over, but you're also just going to give yourself a fraction. And you really don't want to deal with fractions unless you absolutely have to, because that's where a lot of kind of careless errors also get made. So we just want to leave that 3 by itself. And on the left-hand side, we want to go ahead and substitute in what z and y represent. Well, y is pretty easy because we know that y is equal to 5. So 5 can just go in. But z in this equation is currently not by itself. It's being added to y. So we're going to go ahead and subtract it over to that left-hand side. When you add those two equations in, you find that x minus y is squared. The entire thing is squared, which means you need to FOIL. And this tends to be something that people forget about. Then once they remember it, it's kind of like ding, ding, ding. Oh yeah, I remember. And it's pretty easy to walk through, but generally people forget about foiling kind of right off the bat. So if we have x minus y with the whole thing squared, and we do xy, or x minus y multiplied by x minus y, we get x squared minus 2xy plus y squared. Now, while here, we still know that y is just equal to 5, so we would want to substitute 5 in, giving us x squared minus 10x plus 25, and then we could substitute that back into our overall equation. So many steps along the way. They're not necessarily difficult steps, but there are a lot of places where we could make kind of silly mistakes, which tend to grow into bigger issues when we're dealing with physics problems. So we kind of want to make sure that we lay everything out as nice and neat as we can. Now that we have that x squared minus 10x plus 25 substituted in, it's still being subtracted by 20. That didn't just go away, and it's still equal to that 3x. So obviously we're kind of seeing here that it's a good thing that we didn't divide the 3x over, because that would have been kind of a lot to deal with, and even I probably would have made a careless error had I divided that over. So looking at this, I know that I have 25 minus 20, so I'm going to go ahead and do that and get my 5. But now, when you look at this, you should start to notice something at this point. You should notice that you have an x squared, and you have an x, and you have a number that doesn't have a variable at all. So looking at that, we know that really we can't factor anything out, because that's not going to do us a whole lot of good, but we can use the quadratic formula. because we have our x squared, we have our x, and we have our variable that's, or I should say our number that is lacking a variable. But there is a rule that is associated with quad form. It is that your equation has to be set equal to 0. So I went ahead and put everything on the right-hand side. And again, our equation from up here was that x squared minus 10x plus 5 equals 3x. So I subtracted everything to the right-hand side. In hindsight, it probably would have been easier to just subtract the 3x over, but I tend to always put everything on the right. So when I did that, I got 0 is equal to negative x squared plus 10x plus 3x minus 5. So obviously I want to combine these two terms to give me a final answer of negative x squared plus 13x minus 5. Now you can go ahead and plug that into the equation. I have an app that I just use because at this stage in the game, I am not concerned that you could plug numbers into here. I'm concerned that you can get to that point. So you could even just go in if you do quad form calculator. Click on this first one. And then you just plug your A, B, and C in. And remember that your A is always associated with your x squared, your B is always with the x, and your C is the thing that's all by its lonesome. So I just use this. Again, could you plug it into this equation? Absolutely. But at this stage, we've kind of done enough steps that if we have a tool to make our lives easier, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then when you plug it in, you're going to get two answers. I got 0.397 and 12.6. And this is kind of where math stops. It doesn't really help us beyond this. Because like I kind of said at the beginning, the answers that we get in physics have a purpose. They have a meaning. They are associated with something. They have units. Right now, the fact that these don't have units is kind of bothering me because any number that we have should always have a unit with it. So if we were looking at something like that 500-meter dash, well, our answer would have to be that 12.6 because it doesn't make any sense for a time to be 0.397 seconds to run 50 whole meters. So that's where physics kicks in and says, okay, yes, we got two answers, but which one is applicable to this situation? Now, if it was something like an apple was just falling from a tree, well, 12 seconds for an apple to fall down is awfully, awfully high. So the 0.397 seconds would make a lot more sense. But any problems that you get when we actually get into the physics content does have a scenario. It will have units. It will kind of guide you into what your answer should be because it's going to be the answer that makes most sense based on the scenario. So as we can kind of see, we did a lot of work, which kind of originated from what looked to be a pretty simple equation. And we're going to find that happens a lot in this class. You'll start with something that looks very small, and then 7 steps later, you finally have your answer. But along the way, I don't think any of these steps were necessarily extremely difficult, but they are tedious. And we do have to make sure that we're pretty particular when we go through our steps and make sure that everything is nice and clear and organized. Because even along the way here, if I would have just kind of been sloppy with my work and maybe I would forget my 20, now all of a sudden my answers are all wrong. So thanks for watching. You will be using this screencast-o-matic in the next module. And I hope this was a little bit helpful. Please send me an email with any questions that you have, because as we scroll down here, you're going to see that you have a couple questions to do on your own. There's only 6 of them, and they do get a little bit more challenging along the way. So if you come to where you're just kind of stuck, go ahead and shoot me an email, and I can try to help you out.